Kim, what's on your radar today?
Well, there's once again another attack on the free press in America. Over the past few days, PayPal has banned several left-wing independent news organizations and left-wing journalists from using their services. No real explanation as to why they've been banned. They just randomly received a notice. And on top of this, PayPal informed them that if they have any money in their accounts, it'll be held for 180 days for review, after which the company will let them know how they can possibly access their money if they let them have it at all. Again, they weren't given any real explanation as to why they've suddenly been banned from conducting business through PayPal. They all received this fairly generic notice that says, "We recently noticed an issue with your account. Because of this issue, your account has been permanently limited. We understand this may be frustrating and inconvenient, but you'll still be able to see your transaction history for a limited time. You can get more details about your account limitation in our Resolution Center. For more information, contact us and we'll do our best to help. You'll be able to withdraw money from your account within 180 days. We'll email you when it's available. We just want to make sure you have money in your account to cover any payment reversals." So far, the organizations and individuals we're aware of being banned include Mint Press News, Consortium News, Geopolitics and Empire, as well as Caleb Maupin. So why were they banned? Well, I think the first question we need to ask is, why should someone or an organization be banned? Perhaps in a logical world, someone would get themselves booted if they engage in disruptive or illegal behavior. For example, if you were collecting funds to commit a crime like build a bomb, or if you were selling illegal drugs, it would make sense why a money collection service like PayPal would perhaps cut you off. But none of these news organizations and journalists are doing anything illegal. They aren't hate groups associated with any white supremacists calling for violence against anyone, for example. Actually, none of them call for violence at all. In fact, they're all decidedly anti-war. We can't know for sure because PayPal isn't saying. But the one thing all of these news entities have in common is they all speak out against supplying endless weapons to Ukraine so the U.S. can fight a proxy war with Russia. Because they question the current neoliberal, neoconservative tradition of keeping America in endless conflict, they're labeled Russian disinformation outlets, despite the fact they're all Americans. Mint Press News is a left-wing news organization that covers foreign affairs, environmental issues, economics, and politics from an anti-imperialist perspective. They often disagree with mainstream news on what's going on with the various wars and conflicts the West finds themselves either in or supporting. They challenge a lot of the accepted claims, and because of it, are labeled conspiracy theorists or pro-Assad or Kremlin propagandists. In fact, this description of Mint Press News can also be applied to Consortium News and Geopolitics and Empire, as well as Caleb Maupin. They're dissidents. They challenge the narratives and often disagree with the established viewpoint. They get smeared and labeled, and now they apparently even get banned from being able to use PayPal to conduct business. Now, all of these organizations are run by American citizens. Caleb Maupin does work for RT International, but he's an American journalist, no different from any other American journalist working for foreign outlets like BBC, Al Jazeera, or Deutsche Welle. You could, of course, be skeptical that perhaps his employer is requiring him to say certain things or self-censor certain opinions in order to stay consistent with the company line. I think it's fair enough to wonder and question motives when there's connections like these. But I think it's also fair to wonder how free our press or even our country is when American citizens are labeled as Russian-affiliated state media and banned from using PayPal. In fact, many of us Americans work for foreign corporations. Should it become the norm to be shunned as an individual because of the actions of the parent company of the corporation you work for? Even if you disagree with the opinions of the Americans who share their views in these outlets, are their views so offensive they must be silenced? Now, of course, PayPal isn't banning anyone from sharing their views, but obviously, if these news outlets can't conduct business and they're forced to downsize or even shut down entirely, who's going to hear their views? And this is the point. The point is to limit their reach and influence by cutting off their funds. And it isn't even about them. It's actually about you and me. The danger is people like you and I might hear these different viewpoints and actually agree with them. The powers that be have decided they don't want us to decide for ourselves what we think is actually going on. They want to be able to tell us, have us hear nothing but that one state-sanctioned narrative, and be offered no alternatives to think otherwise. Now, the biggest question is, why would PayPal decide to ban these individuals and outlets? What about these news entities was threatening to PayPal's business model as a private company that they had to cut them off? Or are there other forces, perhaps government pressures, that are leaning on private companies like PayPal to do what they can to stop the spread of what the government deems to be misinformation? And that, I think, is the real big implication of this. I mean, this is obviously for these companies, these news organizations to suddenly be cut off from their funding, from their ability to gather funding, I should say, from individuals and from donors of some kind. I mean, that is obviously big news. It's an attack on free press, especially these are Americans. But on top of that, I think we need to be asking some questions as to why PayPal is doing this. This, to me, is once again another showcasing of an attack on the First Amendment. And that is because the government, I believe, is pressuring these companies to do this type of censoring, to say, we got to go after all this misinformation. It makes me wonder, is this part of the Ministry of Truth? Was this one of their first actions, was to call up PayPal and say, you need to stop allowing certain organizations and individuals to collect funds through your organization? That's, I think, the big question.
Yeah, no, right. And we've reached out to, we've reached out to PayPal to see if we can get any clarity about it. But we know that the government is subtly, sometimes not so subtly, pushing private companies to do more about what it describes as misinformation, although some of that misinformation ends up being accurate information, or at least debatable information about the pandemic, about what Russia's doing, those kinds of things. Yeah, these companies, it looks to me like they clearly feel, maybe some of them are making bad calls of their own volition, but they feel like they could be hauled before Congress, or they're going to be held responsible for what the people who use their platforms or use their services are being done. The government will hold them responsible for that, and they're scared. And they're certainly not being, a lot of them, very courageous about it. But you have to understand when forces in the government and in the media, right, are screaming at them that they're responsible for whatever Russia's doing, and they're afraid.
Kim, do you think that there is a difference in terms of proportionality when you look at the attention that this story is getting versus the attention that some of the stories about arguably conservative outlets or conservative people being banned have gotten? I'm thinking of the bannings that happened after 1/6 and the accounts that were seen, Parler, et cetera, as supporting that effort. Have you seen attention around this story that's commensurate with that?
You bring up a really great point. It's exactly right. Right-wing outlets that get banned or censored in some way or have this sort of limitation on them get a lot of press. There's a lot of people that come to their defense, a lot of big names. You'll see like Tucker Carlson on Fox News, who has the largest, most popular cable news program, talking about it. When left-wing outlets get censored, and we saw this also last February, so this was right after January 6th, February, YouTube, actually, I believe it was February 3rd, 2nd or 3rd of 2021, they went and did this kind of slaughter of left-wing news, independent news on their platform, and got rid of a ton of them, that like a couple of dozen, and they were all mostly left-wing, and that didn't
Ford
get
Fisher,
really
right?
any attention. Right, Ford. There was a lot of different organizations.
Just an independent chronicler of records things at protests and just very on the ground reporting, and he's been treated horribly by I think multiple platforms.
And even like Jamal Thomas, who does the progressive soapbox, he got demonetized from YouTube. Just really, but nobody really talks about this very much, which is why I found it really important to cover this today. But I do think there is that discrepancy. But I think the reason is because, unfortunately, in today's landscape, it wasn't always the case. For a long time, right-wing conservatives were very much the ones censoring and hindering, people from being out there in the public and whatnot, from different lifestyles and different opinions. But these days, it does seem to be coming from the left. More of the left is calling for the censorship, calling for the clamping down on misinformation and disinformation. So when they see certain left-wing anti-war outlets, what they consider spewing Kremlin talking points, which are actually in Europe, it's the left wing of all the political parties that are saying, we don't want these weapons to be sent to Ukraine. We want to see negotiations happen. When you actually study European politics, it's all coming from the left. Here in the United States, for whatever reason, it's considered a right-wing talking point to be anti-war, to be saying we need to be negotiating this. So I think, unfortunately, the left is more supportive of this. They're almost calling for it. So they're saying, well, you get what you deserve because you guys have all moved to the right anyway. You guys are a bunch of Kremlin propagandists now.
I wonder if we're moving toward, or what we're going to see is some kind of environment where you have certain companies or platforms or services that are the regime ones or the censorship ones, the ones that at the very least, they should be upfront about it, right? If you use our service, we might decide we don't like you, and we're highly monitoring for this kinds of thing, and so that's how we operate. Versus ones that say no, we're just a service, and we don't really get into unless you're literally organizing violence or something, or doing something illegal. We're going to police that kind of thing. Maybe that ends up being the right wing or the Team Red or the Republican one, and the other one is the Team Blue one, and we're going to have that for like literally everything at some point, which would not be a great outcome, but might just be where we're headed.
Well, what's interesting
or
is that
Elon Musk buys more platforms.
Right, the Elon Musk platform, and the other one.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that so many of the platforms that exist now, like Substack and even Patreon,
right,
are initially had that kind of veneer to them, right? The idea, the whole point of them was they were a refuge from folks who had felt like they've been chased out of other media. And to some extent, their integrity, the reason that they're still valued today, is because they so far haven't bent the knee to this kind of an impulse. It kind of feels like the Bitcoin companies that, if they were to start, releasing information, then it would kind of defeat the whole purpose of the blockchain and all the privacy and the Bitcoin
Patreon's
stuff.
held it. I don't have very much experience at all with Patreon. They've been pretty good.
No, they've actually
great.
done. Patreon for sure has gone and done a ton of censoring, and that's actually why guys like Dave Rubin went and started Locals, was because Patreon was actually deplatforming and doing the same sort of thing that PayPal is now doing. PayPal's kind of new to doing this. They have been doing this. This is not the first time they've done it. But we've seen GoFundMe do it to the truckers, to various protests.
Yeah.
We're now seeing PayPal do it. Patreon definitely was doing it. I think it's a matter of time before Substack starts to say, well, maybe your particular, writings cannot be viewed because they're dangerous, and so we have to take them off the platform.
They would take a huge blow to you might be right, but they would take a huge blow to their credibility, I think, if they did that. Thank you, Kim. We'll have more Rising right after this.